Representative Goodman, on his own, started an impaired driving task force. And he brought together all the stakeholders in the impaired driving community: defense attorneys, prosecutor, DOL, the Ignition Interlock people, everybody who had a stake in impaired driving, and hammered out over years, and it's been 4 years at least that we've had this committee going, with every year having proposals for new legislation. And every year we get a little bit, we get shot down on other things, but it is because of his leadership and his work bringing together the stakeholders, working on the floor, working with the other representatives. The House initially, right away, unanimously passed all of our bills. And thank you, Senator Eide. We had to work a little bit harder in the Senate. Yeah. We had a little issue that popped up, but because of the work on the Transportation Committee, that DUI bill got moved to the following week because of our revenue. Thank you to the IID people on Rogers' committee who said, let's put a $5 charge on ignition interlock devices. Let me just tell you real quickly what that meant. Because we added a $5 charge that ignition interlock device people would have to pay when they sign up for the ignition interlock device, and that came out of Rogers' committee, because of that, that bill was a budgetary item. And when the Senate shut down passing any other bills, that budgetary bills could go on to the next week. If it's necessary to implement budget, it can still be talked about. And that $5 produced, hypothetically, it will, enough revenue to make it a budgetary item, a revenue-producing item for the state. And it allowed it to go into the following week and allowed Senator Eide to continue for the following week to get that passed. So I can't tell you how important these people are to us, because they provide the tools that we use in protecting the public. And between Representative Roger Goodman and his tireless work on impaired driving, and we'll work on the other impaired driving things. We still have things on our list that we're doing. And Senator Eide will continue to work on distracted driving and cell phone and texting legislation. But because of people like them, because of their work, we have the tools to use. And I can't tell you enough how grateful I am. I hope that you continue in your work. I'm really grateful, and we need to look at them and their careers and really support them, because they are tremendous advocates for those of us who work in traffic safety. So thank you very much for all the work you do.
I have the honor today to introduce Perla Lewis. She's from Q13 Fox News. She also does Washington's Most Wanted. And I think one thing is, as law enforcement officers and prosecutors and all the probation and treatment, when we deal with media, sometimes it's the one you don't want the media. If you're in an accident or a collision, it's no offense, but who's going to talk to the media? And everybody goes, and everybody disappears. It's like, where'd everybody go? But working with Q13 and Fox News and Perla, it's a different way. They've worked a good relationship, and I think what they do is, getting these laws passed, is they bring the tragedies to the public so that the public does see what's going on out there. They let the public know about these laws that are coming up, and so they can be aware of how they can vote and how they can get these laws passed. I had the pleasure of meeting Perla a few weeks ago. She did a story on the ignition interlock and the new laws that were passed. Again, there's the media getting out to the public. Hey, these are going to have cameras on them. It's going to make it a lot more difficult to get around these devices. We were able to get that on Washington's Most Wanted, which I believe is aired across the Washington state, parts of Idaho, Oregon, Canada, Portland, so all over this region. So it was a great story. One little story we had inside the story was when we got in the car to go do a compliance check. We actually go in people's houses, knock on their doors to ensure that they have their interlock installed. So they wanted to film this. So I warned them before we left that there's a slight possibility that somebody will answer the door naked. They didn't believe me. They laughed. Our cameraman, they kind of laughed in the back seat. Oh, that won't happen. we drove off. We went to this fairly nice neighborhood, and I was mic'd up, and there was another officer with me. We walked up to the door, and I knocked on the door, and I knocked on the door. I could hear some ruckus inside, and finally the door opens up. There's a gal there, and the first word out of her mouth was, "I'm naked." I said, "Okay, would you like to go get..." "No, I want to know why you're here." So she stood behind the door, and I could hear them laughing from the car as we filmed this. And so great, we get back to the car, and her cameraman and her are laughing quite comically. So we laughed about it as we drove to the next house. It was about 3 miles away. It was an apartment building. And walked up to the door, and about my second knock, the door flies open. I'm naked. There's another woman standing there. So I don't know what it is about Q13 or whatever it is, but that had an everlasting impression. So if you didn't know about Pearla, she actually went to the police academy in Lafayette, Louisiana. It was about 10 years ago. I asked her if she ever worked the streets or worked the roadway, and she sheepishly said she was an undercover prostitute for 2 years. She does actively work. She won an award in Arkansas for actually chasing down a DUI and getting him stopped and turning him over. So I'd like to introduce Pearl Lewis.
Actually, what his exact words were, there's less than 25% chance that someone will be naked. And there was 100%. Every single person that answered the door, in the middle of the day, women. I'm like, you'd expect that from a guy, but what the heck is going on? It was a fun story, though, so thank you very much. Another quick note on the DUI that I helped chase down. This was years ago when I lived in Little Rock and ended up testifying against him. I was trying to remember on the way here, it was either his 7th or 8th offense. So the judge in that case finally threw the book at him, and he was about 50 years old, and needless to say, he is now spending the rest of his life in prison because of that last offense. So I'm grateful for a judge that finally said, enough is enough, we're not putting you back on the streets to do this again. He almost killed two kids, a judge's kid, so I think that helped push that through, so we're grateful. We've had the opportunity of doing a lot of great stories with WSP over the past couple of years. The ignition and interlock system was the most recent, but we've done pit maneuvers, which is one of my favorite stories ever. We've helped chase down child predators with the Missing and Exploited Children's Task Force that you all have, and of course the DRE program, which we were able to do, was it 2 years ago, roughly? Which I had never heard of, actually. It was Sergeant Crandall that came to me and said, you know, there's a unit that helps with, we can actually tell if you are drugged or impaired driving, not just alcohol, but everything from prescription medicine to illegal narcotics. And they let us behind the scenes to see what they do, and we were able to get that out there. We had no idea as a news agency that was out there. The public certainly had no idea. We got a lot of great feedback from that. One of the stories that I personally enjoy doing, and I think our station enjoys doing, is legislation about drunk or impaired driving in particular. There are 2 segments of viewers that will watch that. You'll have those that will watch it to see how far they can push the limits, right, what their new line is. But there's a larger segment of people that will watch it because their lives have been impacted by someone who has been driving either drunk or impaired. I think we all, can you raise your hand if you know someone who's either driven drunk or who has been killed or hurt by someone who is driving impaired? Every single person. Same with our viewers. I was actually hit by a drunk driver myself several years ago, and I rarely talk about it just because miraculously I really wasn't hurt. But I was on my way, I was working for a morning show in Indianapolis at that time. Was on my way to work. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning. Driver comes in of nowhere, comes completely around, and I drove a fairly large SUV because it snows a lot in Indianapolis, but he managed to come almost all the way through my SUV. He is drunk, his passenger is drunk, they proceed to get out of their car, he's yelling and screaming and cursing at me, slurring and screaming. His passenger gets out and goes around to my passenger side door and is trying to get the door open. Thankfully it was locked. The driver was the more irate. He's screaming at me, trying to get into my car. Thankfully, he had crushed it so badly that he was unable to get it open. I wasn't able to get it open later. I'm reaching for my phone, which was on my seat. Now it's somewhere over here. It's pitch black outside. Called 911. Police arrived a couple minutes later. He was arrested. It was not his first offense. So after doing the story with you, I wonder if there had been an interlock system set up in Indiana at that time, I probably never would have been hit. So thank you for the legislation that you're introducing. Thank you to all of you, truly, who go out there and actually hold these people accountable. We love working with you on Washington's Most Wanted. We hope to do a lot more stories. I think it's very important to keep these types of topics out in the community, but I also think it's important to reinforce to the community what you do every day. And I know that stopping someone that's been drinking or is impaired in some way is not fun, but you all do it every day to make your community safer. So thank you very, very much. If there's ever a story that you'd like to do, please feel free to approach me anytime, particularly regarding this topic. Okay?
And to present our awards, so I think you can see the theme here, is that we have to have, is you see the theme that we have here, because we can't do what we do if we don't have representatives at the legislature making these laws for us to enforce. We also can't do it without the public knowing, so the media piece is so huge. And we also can't do it without knowing what we're doing in the courtroom, which is where Pam saves us all of the time, and hopefully Moses and I can help people on the DUI side. And we also can't do it without the tireless advocacy and, unfortunately, the victim perspective. We can't, bring their loved ones back, but what we can do is honor them by bringing people like the Mad Volunteers that we have in Washington as well as national, to put all the pieces together. And I will tell you this year, we kind of made light of the legislative session, but I think anyone who watches the news knows it was very intense, and that the last push, I know from our side, was terrifying, and we were probably harassing you both very much, but we couldn't have done that without all the assistance. And so to present the awards, we have, of course, our national president again, Jan Luthers. For those of you who don't know, law enforcement photo opportunities are very important in award ceremonies. Right? Thank you. Senator Tracy Hyde.
Were you an undercover prostitute too? Didn't look like that. That's amazing. I love that. You've embarrassed me. Thank you very much. It's an honor.
And Representative Roger Goodman.
There you go. Yeah.